How's it going, my bakers? Hope you're having a great day so far. Welcome back to the channel. This video will be my first milling experience, so let's get in the kitchen and see how it goes. Many of you have been asking me about milling videos, and I've been planning to buy a mill for the last couple of years. And this is the mill I was planning to buy, the Mockmill Lino 200. It was supposed to be a Christmas present for myself this year, but coincidentally, and just before I committed to it, a very nice person from Mockmill emailed me and offered to send me the exact mill that I was going to buy anyway, with no strings attached. German Santa came early and made my Christmas. It was delivered to me a couple months ago, but up until making this video, I had not used it, because I wanted to record my first milling experience. I haven't done a lot of research before attempting this, I've been too busy lately. But I have read a couple of extremely well put together and informative articles on breadbakingahome.com, which were written by my good friend in baking, Kevin. I'm sure a lot of you have met him in my comment sections. Armed with some knowledge, I was confident to give it a good first try. So here's the wheat grain that we're going to use. It is organic wheat, grown in Lincolnshire, and it has a protein content of just over 10%. We're going to keep this one pure, so the only other ingredients that we're going to use are yeast, salt, and water. When it comes to the equipment, we got pretty standard stuff. A bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, and a razor blade for scoring. For baking, I will use my Lodge cast iron combo cooker. It is perfect for a medium-sized loaf. Using this will give me the best bake possible in a home oven. The cast iron walls of the pot will bake the bread evenly on all sides, and it will not let the steam escape. The moisture will help the dough expand, and it will ensure that the crust is nicely thin and crispy. I didn't want to use too much wheat on my first bake, in case it ended up in a disaster, and that's why I'm making a medium-sized loaf, which I'm going to proof in this oblong basket. Okay, so let's get to it, let's start milling. The instruction manual says that the mill should be on before the grain is poured into the hopper. And number 1 is the recommended grind setting for wheat, so that's what I set it at. The settings on this mill go from 0 to 20. The smaller the number, the finer the flour. One thing to be aware of is the heat being produced by grinding. If it gets too high, the gluten-forming proteins could get cooked, which would make an already weak flour even weaker. My flour ended up at 44 degrees Celsius or 111 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty high. Next time, I might chill my grain or even keep it in a freezer. Generally, freshly milled, non-mass-produced flour will have weaker gluten, and even more so, this particular flour is only about 10% protein. So I was expecting this to be weak. To help out the dough structure a little bit, I decided to sift out some of the bran, because bran interferes with gluten formation. It's like a bunch of little razor blades cutting the gluten strands. I will use the sifted bran for giving the loaf a nice coating. And of course I adjusted my recipe ingredients according to how much flour I ended up with, after deducting the 10 grams of bran. When it came to temperature control, I was aiming for standard 24 degrees to 25 degrees Celsius. Since my flour was still pretty warm, and my kitchen was only around 21 degrees Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit, I just used room temperature water. I'm making this dough without actively kneading it, so it's not going to warm up that much. Keeping the temperature in check is one way to control fermentation. The other way is by adjusting the amount of yeast. Thanks to the abundance of nutrients and active enzymes in freshly milled flour, fermentation was going to be quite quick here, so I reduced the amount of yeast to 0.7%. This should slow it down to a normal rate. All the extra nutrients and enzymes would come in really handy with naturally leavened dough. Who knows, I may get a starter going again one of these days. As I was mixing this dough, I could feel it was quite weak. It almost felt like dough made out of spelt flour. The temperature was spot on at 24 degrees Celsius or 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Bulk fermentation took 2 hours, and I gave the dough one fold halfway through bulk fermentation. The hydration of this dough is only about 64%. It is not sticky, so I didn't have to dust it with flour. Watch the dough as I fold it. With each following fold, the dough keeps tearing more and more. Often, when I try new recipes, not everything goes to plan. I knew this dough was going to be weak, but I had imagined that it would have a better structure than this. So as I'm handling the dough, in my mind I'm adjusting the method further down the line. At this point, I decided to give it a pre-shape before final shaping, to give it a better chance to stay upright as it bakes. And already here, I decided to not use the handle for the razor blade, because there will not be any ears on this loaf, so I'm not going to bother slashing it with a curved blade. Whenever you're working with a new recipe, you should always try to feel the dough and imagine how it's going to behave down the line. And if you think that it's not going the way that you want it to go, then adjust the method. Give it an extra fold, pre-shape it more tightly, cut the fermentation time down if it's fermenting too quickly. If it's too loose and sticky, perhaps throw it in a bread tin instead of baking a freestanding loaf. Recipes are just lists of ingredients. It is the method that makes the bread. And at the end of the day, It's all in your hands. Okay, I rested the dough for 20 minutes, now I'm doing the final shaping. If I roll this too tight, I know it's going to tear, so I'm being quite gentle here. I was not expecting a lot of tension in this dough anyway. After shaping the loaf, I will cover it with the bran that I sifted out earlier. To make it stick, I'll brush the surface of the loaf with water. There are two ways to do this. You could either sprinkle the bran onto the loaf, like I'm doing in the video, or you can sprinkle the bran on the table or on a tray and then roll the loaf in it. I chose to do it this way because I wasn't sure if 10 grams would be enough for the whole loaf. But in the end, it looked like it was more than enough. And now I know. The loaf goes in a bread basket with the smooth side down. I used the remaining bran to cover the bottom of it too. Final proof was pretty quick, at only 40 minutes. During this time I preheated my oven to 250 degrees Celsius, fan on, that's 480 Fahrenheit. And I also preheated my cast iron pot. We will not be baking at this high of a temperature, but we will start the bake at this temperature. It should make the loaf jump up as it hits the oven. The dough started tearing at the bottom, and that was a sign for finishing the final proof. A nice glutinous dough would not tear open like that. Again, this is behaving more like spelt. But there's nothing wrong with that, we just work with the dough as it is. And now I'm gonna slash it, spray it with some water, cover it with a lid, pop it in the oven for 25 minutes, then we're gonna take it out, remove the lid, and then place it back into the oven for another 10 to 15 minutes to finish off the crust. And while I'm finishing the bake, I want to ask you if you mill your own flour. And do you have any good tips and tricks to share down in the comments? Or any good reliable sources of information? Of course, the milling and bread making process is pretty straightforward, but there are some key things to be considered, and there must be a good few ways of improving a loaf made with freshly milled flour. And a few of them I already know, like sifting out the bran for one, using acidic ingredients like buttermilk or yogurt for tightening the gluten, or scalding perhaps. I know an easy answer would just be to use some freshly milled flour mixed with some store-bought strong bread flour, but I don't want to go down that road, or at least I want to stay away from it for as long as possible. If I'm going to mill my own flour, I want to keep it pure. But there we are, that's my first freshly milled flour loaf. And I am pretty happy with it. It looks good, has a crunchy crust, has a nice color, it is soft, and it tasted great. It had a nice light nutty flavor. Now we can move on to the really interesting part of answering all the questions how to improve this bread. And don't you worry, I'm not planning to just switch to freshly milled flour from now. I can't leave most of you behind, that would be crazy. Once I start producing decent recipes, I'll make sure to either bake 2 loaves in each video, one with freshly milled flour, one with store-bought, or I will give you reliable instructions for converting freshly milled flour recipes to store-bought flour recipes. I'm very much looking forward to milling and learning, because there is quite a lot to discover here. So what do you think of this recipe, and what is your experience with freshly milled flour? Let me know down in the comments. You want to see more videos like this one? Click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.